Disclaimer. The following video contains content about real-life abuse, captivity, and crimes involving children. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. All details are taken from verified public sources and are intended to raise awareness of the realities of child abuse and the importance of intervention. Please note, the video footage and images used do not depict the actual incident or individuals involved. However, the story is based on true events. The House of Horrors, the true story of the Turpin family abuse case. January 14th, 2018. A cold morning. Darkness still lingered over Paris, California. The town was quiet, suburban, unremarkable, but inside a single house on Muirwoods Road, a revolution was happening. Jordan Turpin, 17, trembled as she stared at the dusty carpet and the window above her. For years, the window had been a forbidden dream, sunlight on the other side, a world she had only imagined. But now, clutching a battered, deactivated cell phone, she stood on the precipice of escape. Her hands shook so hard she could barely press the buttons. She whispered to her younger sister, who watched from the edge of the room, "I have to do this. It's our only chance." She forced the window up. A crack of cold air stung her face, air she had not felt in years. Her legs trembled as she climbed out. For a moment, she hesitated, heart racing, wondering if her parents would hear, but the house was silent. The world outside, impossibly big. Once on the ground, she looked up at the gray sky. She felt for the first time in her life something close to freedom. She walked quickly but awkwardly, her legs unused to space, her body weak from years of starvation. She had practiced this call for weeks, rehearsing every word in the darkness, mouthing the phrases she had seen on television but never spoken aloud. Jordan dialed 911. The line rang, once, twice. A voice answered. "Operator, 911, what's your emergency?" She hesitated. Her voice, fragile and unused, sounded foreign in the morning air. "Jordan, I just ran away from home. My parents are abusive. They hurt us. There's 13 of us. My sisters are chained up right now. They're chained to their beds." Her words tumbled out, halting and awkward. The operator, at first, thought it must be a prank. A girl who sounded much younger than 17, her speech full of uncertainty. "Operator, can you tell me your address?" "Jordan, I don't know the address. I've never been outside. It's Muirwoods Road. I think. It's a yellow house, the one with the van outside." Jordan looked at the world around her. Trees, parked cars, things she had only seen through dirty glass. She kept talking, desperate for the operator to believe her. "Jordan, we don't get enough food. We're starving. Some of my siblings are chained. I haven't bathed in a year. My parents won't let us." The operator's voice shifted, calm, but now with an edge of urgency. "Operator, stay where you are. We're sending officers right now. You're very brave. Can you see any street signs?" Jordan looked around, but the world was too big, too new. "No, I'm scared." She could hear her heart pounding in her ears. She wondered if her parents would find her before the police did. She began to cry, quietly. But she did not hang up. She would not go back inside. While police traced the call, Jordan tried to hide behind a tree, terrified that a car driving by might be her parents. The world seemed unreal, the birds louder than she had ever imagined. Every passing stranger was a threat. Meanwhile, inside the house, the siblings sensed something was wrong. Jennifer, one of the oldest, heard Jordan's window slide open. She held her breath, hoping their parents had not noticed. She mouthed a silent prayer. Let her be safe, let her be believed. David and Louise Turpin, still asleep, had no idea what was unfolding just outside. When the officers arrived, they saw Jordan first. A thin, dirty girl in pajamas, clutching a cell phone and looking terrified. She tried to speak, but years of isolation made her stammer. The officers asked for her name, her age. She could not answer with certainty. Officer, where are your parents now? Jordan, inside. Please don't tell them I called, please. She described the chains, the beatings, the hunger. She pointed at the house, an ordinary home, beige and silent, with curtains drawn tight and a battered van parked out front. One officer stayed with Jordan, readying for backup. Another approached the front door. He knocked, lightly at first, then with urgency. No answer. He knocked again, louder. After a pause, the door opened. David Turpin, pale and unkempt, peered out. He smiled. A weak, rehearsed smile. Officer, sir, we received a report. We need to come inside. David hesitated, but the officers insisted. They stepped into the darkness. The smell hit them first. Rot, urine, unwashed bodies. Inside, the children stood in a line, silent, unmoving, dressed in filthy clothes. Two girls, their ankles swollen and raw, were chained to bunk beds. One boy, barely able to stand, stared at the officers with wide, fearful eyes. Louise Turpin appeared, trying to smile, asking, "Is everything okay? We're a good Christian family." But the evidence was everywhere. The officers called for backup, paramedics, and detectives. They began to cut the chains, to lead the children out, one by one. The Turpin parents watched, silent and uncomprehending, as the world they'd built in secrecy began to unravel. In the aftermath, every neighbor was interviewed. Reporters swarmed the street, cameras rolling, as the nation demanded answers. How could this happen here? They asked. The neighbors answered one by one. I never saw the kids, maybe once or twice, but they were always so quiet. They seemed like a normal family, a little odd, but aren't we all? Sometimes I saw the kids picking through the trash at night. I thought they were just playing. Turpin, I always said she was homeschooled. I just thought she was strict. No one had ever called the police. No one had knocked on the door. The family's isolation was complete, built on fear, secrecy, and the silence of those around them. Inside the house, the children rarely saw daylight. The windows were covered, the doors locked, and when they were allowed outside, it was only for brief, supervised moments, late at night or early in the morning when no one would notice. The children moved in a tight pack, their eyes lowered, their voices almost never heard. To the world, the Turpins were just another family. Behind closed doors, they were prisoners. The Turpin children's lives followed a strict, punishing routine, one set not by the clock, but by the whims of their parents. Each morning, if it could be called morning, began with hunger. The children were fed one meal a day, sometimes less, bread crusts, scraps of frozen food, and occasional boiled egg. If a child tried to steal food, even a crumb, the punishment was swift and severe. Louise would drag the offending child into the schoolroom, really just a filthy, cluttered bedroom where chains and padlocks waited. Sometimes a child was left chained for weeks, only released for the briefest bathroom breaks. Their skin grew raw where metal rubbed flesh. Infection was constant, untreated, ignored. There was no laughter, no play, no kindness. Toys, if they were allowed, sat unopened on high shelves, gifts for show, never to be touched. Books were limited to Bibles and religious tracts. There were no lessons, no games. David worked during the day, often leaving Louise to run the household, but his absence did not mean safety. When he returned, the punishments often grew harsher, as if he resented the world outside. The older siblings tried to shield the younger ones, whispering words of comfort in the dark, but they were powerless. The younger children grew up never knowing what freedom felt like.
David Allen Turpin and Louise Anna Turpin presented themselves as deeply religious, loving parents, a good Christian couple who loved their large family. But behind their smiles was a twisted partnership rooted in control, isolation, and a fanatical belief in their own righteousness. David, tall and bespectacled, had once been a promising engineer. He grew up in rural West Virginia, a quiet and awkward boy. He graduated college and began a career with Lockheed Martin, eventually earning a comfortable salary. Louise, born Louise Robinette, grew up in Princeton, West Virginia, in a strict and conservative home. Her family attended church every Sunday. She met David when she was just 16. They married in 1885, and Louise dropped out of high school to start a family with her new husband. From the beginning, Louise's need for control was clear. She wanted a large family, not just out of faith, but as a sign of her own worth. 13 children followed, one after another, over nearly 3 decades. On the surface, the Turpins seemed successful. David wore a suit to work. The family went to church, at first. But as the years passed, they withdrew from the world. Louise became obsessed with cleanliness and purity, but her rules were cruel and ever-changing. She saw herself as the queen of the household. The children called her mother, or sometimes Mrs. Turpin. David was quieter, often absent emotionally and physically. When he was home, he enforced Louise's rules, but rarely questioned them. Sometimes he seemed afraid of her. To outsiders, they smiled and spoke kindly, but inside they enforced a regime of terror, hunger, and neglect. The parents' bedroom was locked, filled with food and luxury, while the children starved and slept on dirty mattresses. Louise told friends and relatives that God had given her a special calling, that her family was destined for greatness. She wrote long, rambling posts on Facebook about her children's achievements, all of them invented. She staged elaborate family photos, lining her children up like dolls for the camera. No one knew what happened when the camera was put away. The Turpins' abuse began in Texas, but it intensified when the family moved to California in 2010. They left behind a house in Rio Vista that neighbors would later describe as haunted, windows covered, grass waist-high, a stench that seeped into the street. For a brief stay in Murrieta, they bought the house in Paris. The new house was bigger, with more bedrooms and a high fence. For the children, the walls only grew taller. Louise liked California. She told her family it was her fresh start, but in reality, it allowed her to isolate her children further. The family rarely left the house. When they did, it was for Disneyland, Louise's favorite place, or to renew their wedding vows in Las Vegas. These outings became rituals. Louise dressed the children in matching clothes, brushed and braided the girls' hair, and told them to smile, like you mean it or else. At Disneyland, they moved as a tight pack, never speaking to strangers. If a child lagged behind or looked unhappy, Louise would whisper threats in their ear. The children learned not to talk, not to laugh, not to attract attention. Some of the older siblings began to suspect that the world outside was forbidden for a reason, that their family secrets were too dark to ever reveal. At home, the windows stayed closed, the doors locked. David installed security cameras, telling the children it was for their protection. But the real goal was to make escape impossible. The reality of life in the Turpin house was filth, starvation, and despair. Garbage piled up in the hallways. The smell of urine and excrement hung in the air. The children slept 2 or 3 to a mattress, often with only a thin blanket for warmth. The food was kept locked away. The refrigerator was filled with pies, meats, and treats, but it was for the parents only. If Louise caught a child taking food, she would beat them or shackle them to the bed. Breakfast was a joke, sometimes a slice of bread, sometimes nothing at all. Lunch and dinner, if they came, might be a spoonful of peanut butter or a handful of chips. The children drank from the bathroom sink, or when that was forbidden, from the toilet. They were forbidden to bathe more than once a year. Their hair grew long, matted, and filthy. The older girls learned to braid it to hide the tangles. Their teeth rotted. No one saw a doctor, a dentist, or a nurse. When the smell became too much, Louise would force the children to scrub themselves in cold water. The punishment for making a mess was worse than the punishment for being dirty. The children spoke to each other in whispers. They invented games to pass the time, spelling words on the wall with their fingers, making up stories, dreaming of a world where food was plenty and the sun was warm on their skin. They didn't know what a friend was. They didn't know what a police officer was. The world outside might as well have been the moon, but they dreamed of it all the same. Louise's obsession with appearances extended to the digital world. She created Facebook accounts for herself, for David, and sometimes even for the children, carefully controlled, of course. She posted photos of family trips to Disneyland, birthdays with towering cakes, everyone smiling in matching outfits. Relatives who saw these posts marveled at how put together the Turpin children looked. Some commented on the children's thinness or their awkward smiles, but Louise always had an explanation. We're just a shy family. We don't like a lot of junk food. Homeschooling keeps us close. No one ever guessed the truth. The children were coached before every photo. Louise threatened them. If you don't smile, there would be no dinner tonight. After every trip, the punishment resumed. Chains, hunger, silence. Louise used social media to keep up appearances, to fool her distant family, and to project the image of a loving, quirky clan. The children saw these posts too. Sometimes they wondered if the people in the pictures were really them. Smiling, happy, free. The Facebook photos became evidence later, haunting reminders of a lie so convincing even the victims sometimes believed it. Within the suffocating walls of the Turpin house, fear governed every second. The siblings, ranging in age from toddlers to adults, developed their own language of glances, gestures, and whispers. Their voices rarely rose above a murmur, and every footstep was cautious, measured, afraid to draw Louise's wrath. The rules were unknowable, ever-shifting, arbitrary. One day, Louise would decide no one could speak after sunrise. The next, she would punish a child for crying after a beating, accusing them of being ungrateful. David enforced the silence, rarely raising his own voice, but always looming, an accomplice by omission and sometimes by action. The children learned to communicate in code, sometimes tracing words on the wall with a fingertip, sometimes mouthing syllables in the dark. They invented games, secret songs, and stories to help the youngest cope. The older siblings taught the younger ones to read using old Bibles or scraps of newspaper salvaged from the trash. The siblings developed intense bonds. The older ones, Jennifer, Joshua, Jessica, Jordan, felt responsible for their younger brothers and sisters. Jennifer would stay up late counting heads in the darkness, whispering comfort to a little brother shivering from hunger. Joshua risked beatings to sneak bits of food to a younger sibling when he could. They became each other's protectors, teachers, friends, and sometimes even surrogate parents. But the fear never faded. Every sound in the hallway could mean punishment. Every day could bring new rules. The children lived on edge, never knowing what would come next. Physical punishment was routine. Louise might beat a child with a belt, a wooden paddle, or her hands. The threat of being chained for bad behavior hung over everyone. Sometimes the children wondered if the world outside was worse, if escape was even possible. In the darkness, they dreamed of freedom. But for most, the dream seemed impossible. It was Jordan Turpin, slight and determined, who first dared to dream beyond survival. Jordan had grown up in silence and hunger, never attending school, rarely leaving her room. But her mind was restless. She listened at the door when her parents watched TV, absorbing words and phrases. When she was allowed to see a little television, she paid close attention, learning about a world she had never seen. She began to secretly journal, using scraps of paper, bits of crayon, anything she could hide. She wrote about the outside world, about the freedom she glimpsed through books and TV. She wrote about food, sunlight, and even about other children laughing in the street outside. Her hope ignited a spark in her younger sister, who shared her hunger for escape. Together they whispered plans late at night, hearts pounding as they discussed what life might be like beyond the locked door. Jordan found an old, deactivated cell phone in the house, forgotten by Louise and David, left at the bottom of a junk drawer. She kept it hidden under her mattress, experimenting with it in secret. She charged it using a cable she managed to borrow, bit by bit, always careful to avoid being caught. Her plan was risky. If discovered, she knew she would be chained for weeks, or worse, but she was driven by desperation and love for her siblings. She began to rehearse. She memorized what she would say to 911, practicing in whispers until the words felt real. The moment of escape became their secret hope, a beacon in the dark. The escape took weeks of planning. Jordan and her younger sister watched their parents' routines, looking for gaps, moments when Louise would be busy in another room or when David's car was gone. They waited for a morning when the house was quiet, when the chains on the beds were loose enough to slip free. The night before, Jordan barely slept, replaying every step in her mind. Sneak to the window. Open it, quietly. Climb out. Don't look back. Jordan's heart hammered in her chest as she whispered to her sister, "It's time."
She hugged her tightly, promising to send help. At dawn, she slipped from her bed. Her hands shook as she opened the window. The cold air filled her lungs. It was almost painful, a sensation she had never felt so sharply before. She dropped to the ground, clutching the phone. The world seemed enormous and empty. The sidewalk stretched forever in both directions. She looked back once, seeing the house silhouetted against the pale sky, her siblings' faces pressed to the window, silently cheering her on. She forced herself to move.
The Turpin children's journey to the hospital was like entering another world. Paramedics transported them to Riverside University Health System Medical Center. As they arrived, doctors and nurses were shocked by their condition: severely underweight, muscle atrophy, skin infections, lice, dental abscesses, and wounds from shackles and beatings. Some of the children, technically adults, weighed less than 80 pounds. The oldest, 29, was mistaken for a teenager because she was so small and frail. The medical team took extraordinary measures. Each sibling was given a bed, clean clothes, and a warm blanket. They were offered food, simple, bland at first, so as not to overwhelm their starving bodies. Some children cried when given their first sandwich or glass of water, unsure if it was real or a trick. The children were terrified of bathing, at first refusing to get into the shower. Nurses coaxed them gently, explaining every step, letting them feel the water on their hands before helping them wash away years of grime. Simple things became milestones. A nurse recalled, "One of the girls asked me if it was okay to eat an apple. She'd never had a whole apple to herself before. She kept asking if I'd take it away." Therapists and counselors were brought in, skilled in trauma recovery. They began the slow work of rebuilding trust, using art, music, games, and gentle conversation to reach children who had never known kindness from adults. The siblings gravitated toward each other, always seeking to be together. The hospital made special allowances, letting brothers and sisters visit each other as often as possible. Small victories, smiles, laughter, trying new foods became moments of celebration for staff and family alike. For the first time, the Turpin children experienced safety, comfort, and the simple joys of being children. Detectives, social workers, and journalists set about piecing together the Turpin family's hidden history. The investigation spread from California back to Texas, where the family had lived before. Detectives combed through old records, property deeds, and school forms. They interviewed anyone who had ever crossed paths with David or Louise Turpin. Neighbors in Texas remembered the family as strange and secretive. One former neighbor said, "You'd see the kids sometimes, late at night, walking in a line. They never talked. It gave me chills." Another recalled the smell coming from the Turpin's house, like garbage and something rotten. School district records showed that Louise had filed paperwork to homeschool her children in both Texas and California. But in both states, oversight was minimal. No one ever checked on the children's welfare. No one asked to see lesson plans or to meet the students. The Turpins slipped through the cracks, year after year. Extended family members described losing touch over time. Louise's mother told investigators, "We tried to call, but she'd never answer. She always said the kids were busy or sick or out on a trip. I wish I'd pushed harder." As the truth came out, the world learned just how easy it had been for David and Louise Turpin to hide their crimes, by using legal loopholes, by moving frequently, and by depending on the silence of others. Child welfare officials and lawmakers were left to reckon with the gaps in the system that had allowed the abuse to continue for decades. As the case captured global attention, investigators, lawmakers, and child advocates began dissecting every step where the system had failed the Turpin children. The failures were not one, but many, layered and insidious. Neighbors replayed old memories with new horror. Some recalled seeing pale, thin children through dirty windows, moving in silence like ghosts. A few had witnessed the children digging in the trash for scraps late at night, but assumed they were just playing or maybe living under strict, odd religious rules. Some neighbors blamed themselves for not calling authorities. One confessed to a reporter, "We always thought something was off, but we didn't want to be nosy." In Texas, the story was the same. One former neighbor told journalists, "Those kids never played outside. If you spoke to them, they'd stare at you like you were an alien. Sometimes I thought I should do something, but I didn't want trouble." The school districts were exposed for lax oversight.
In both Texas and California, Louise filed homeschool affidavits and never had to provide proof of actual teaching or student progress. With no home visits required, the Turpins' brand of schooling was a legal cover for isolation and neglect. There were no mandatory health checkups, no dental visits, no family doctor. No one noticed their absence in the community. Extended family members faced their own guilt. Louise's sisters admitted in interviews that they suspected some form of abuse. She'd say strange things on the phone, like how she kept her kids inside to protect them, one sister recalled. But Louise was skilled at keeping people away, cutting off contact, changing phone numbers, moving frequently. Social services, law enforcement, and neighbors had all missed warning signs. In the words of one Riverside County official, the system didn't just fail the Turpin children, it never even found them. As details emerged, the world grappled with the horrifying realization that such severe abuse could be hidden in plain sight. Politicians called for reform. Newspapers published editorials on homeschooling loopholes, mandatory reporting, and the importance of listening to children's voices. But for the Turpin siblings, these changes came too late. The Turpin children's journey to the hospital was like entering another world. Paramedics transported them for Riverside University Health System Medical Center. As they arrived, doctors and nurses were shocked by their condition. Severely underweight, muscle atrophy, skin infections, lice, dental abscesses, and wounds from shackles and beatings. Some of the children, technically adults, weighed less than 80 pounds. The oldest, 29, was mistaken for a teenager because she was so small and frail. The medical team took extraordinary measures. Each sibling was given a bed, clean clothes, and a warm blanket. They were offered food, simple, bland at first, so as not to overwhelm their starving bodies. Some children cried when given their first sandwich or glass of water, unsure if it was real or a trick. The children were terrified of bathing, at first refusing to get into the shower. Nurses coaxed them gently, explaining every step, letting them feel the water on their hands before helping them wash away years of grime. Simple things became milestones. A nurse recalled, "One of the girls asked me if it was okay to eat an apple. She'd never had a whole apple to herself before. She kept asking if I'd take it away." Therapists and counselors were brought in, skilled in trauma recovery. They began the slow work of rebuilding trust, using art, music, games, and gentle conversation to reach children who had never known kindness from adults. The siblings gravitated toward each other, always seeking to be together. The hospital made special allowances, letting brothers and sisters visit each other as often as possible. Small victories, smiles, laughter, trying new foods became moments of celebration for staff and family alike. For the first time, the Turpin children experienced safety, comfort, and the simple joys of being children. Detectives, social workers, and journalists set about piecing together the Turpin family's hidden history. The investigation spread from California back to Texas, where the family had lived before. Detectives combed through old records, property deeds, and school forms. They interviewed anyone who had ever crossed paths with David or Louise Turpin. Neighbors in Texas remembered the family as strange and secretive. One former neighbor said, "You'd see the kids sometimes, late at night, walking in a line. They never talked. It gave me chills." Another recalled the smell coming from the Turpin's house, like garbage and something rotten. School district records showed that Louise had filed paperwork to homeschool her children in both Texas and California. But in both states, oversight was minimal. No one ever checked on the children's welfare. No one asked to see lesson plans or to meet the students. The Turpins slipped through the cracks, year after year. Extended family members described losing touch over time. Louise's mother told investigators, "We tried to call, but she'd never answer. She always said the kids were busy or sick or out on a trip. I wish I had pushed harder." As the truth came out, the world learned just how easy it had been for David and Louise Turpin to hide their crimes. By using legal loopholes, by moving frequently, and by depending on the silence of others. Child welfare officials and lawmakers were left to reckon with the gaps in the system that had allowed the abuse to continue for decades. The Turpin children's journey to the hospital was like entering another world. Paramedics transported them to Riverside University Health System Medical Center. As they arrived, doctors and nurses were shocked by their condition. Severely underweight, muscle atrophy, skin infections, lice, dental abscesses, and wounds from shackles and beatings. Some of the children, technically adults, weighed less than 80 pounds. The oldest, 29, was mistaken for a teenager because she was so small and frail. The medical team took extraordinary measures. Each sibling was given a bed, clean clothes, and a warm blanket. They were offered food, simple, bland at first, so as not to overwhelm their starving bodies. Some children cried when given their first sandwich or glass of water, unsure if it was real or a trick. The children were terrified of bathing, at first refusing to get into the shower. Nurses coaxed them gently, explaining every step, letting them feel the water on their hands before helping them wash away years of grime. Simple things became milestones. A nurse recalled, "One of the girls asked me if it was okay to eat an apple." She'd never had a whole apple to herself before. She kept asking if I'd take it away. Therapists and counselors were brought in, skilled in trauma recovery. They began the slow work of rebuilding trust, using art, music, games, and gentle conversation to reach children who had never known kindness from adults. The siblings gravitated toward each other, always seeking to be together. The hospital made special allowances, letting brothers and sisters visit each other as often as possible. Small victories, smiles, laughter,